What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is August 9th, 2025, exactly 9:01 p.m. where I'm at right now, and we are continuing our 13th book in our Book to React series. This is episode 16 of Black Bolshevik, Autobiography of an Afro-American Communist, written by Harry Haywood. This is a fascinating book that I've been waiting to read for quite a few years. In our last episode, we finished all of chapter 12, where he was talking about returning to the United States of America after studying in the Soviet Union for about 4 years and beginning good party work, organizing people for strikes and for unionizing the workers, integrating workers, because at the time American workers were segregated based on race, and also getting rid of white reactionary racists within the party as well, and organizing the Communist Party to fight back against the railroad trial against these Scottsboro boys, a group of young men who were accused of assaulting and taking advantage of a young white woman on a train. So it was a very fascinating chapter and a great read, and a lot of support from people in the live stream chat. So hopefully we will replicate that in this live stream as we continue to delve into this man's life and gain inspiration and knowledge from his insights during his time living in the 20th century. This is a very rare book, as we mention every time. This book is slowly going out of print. When we began this series, there was a paperback version available on Amazon that is now sold out or currently unavailable, but you can get a hardcover version for close to $700 if that's what you're into. But as we are good communists on this channel, you can get this book for free. Just scroll down to the attachment section at libcom.org or marxist.org to find this book and add it to your collection and read it yourself if you're not interested in my take on this wonderful book. And yeah, so today we're going to be reading a few chapters. We're going to be reading chapter 13, Class Warfare in the Mines, and also chapter 14, whose title is, hold on, let me open it up. Chapter 14, Reunion in Moscow. So we're going to be knock out about 30 pages in this book. So we're going to be on live for close to like 2 hours or so. And hopefully we will get some good comments in the live stream, as I will be reading all of them as we break down this text. Without further ado, let's get into the story. Hopefully y'all are with it and y'all enjoy it. And Class Warfare in the Mines, chapter 13. What page is this? 364. In June 1931, the TUUL sent me to Pittsburgh to work as an organizer in a strike led by the National Miners Union, or NMU, a TUUL affiliate. It was the largest strike the TUUL had led up to that point and involved some 42,000 coal miners in the Pittsburgh area, eastern Ohio, northern West Virginia, and western Pennsylvania, 6,000 of whom were blacks. This strike was part of the whole upsurge of working class activity led by the Communist Party during this period. The NMU was founded in 1928 by members of the rank and file Save the Union Committee of the United Mine Workers of America, or UMWA. John Watts was elected president, William Boyce vice president, and Pat Toohey secretary-treasurer. When the TUUL was formed in 1929, the NMU affiliated with the new Revolutionary Labor Organization. Its founding immediately followed the defeat of the UMWA in the bituminous coal strike of 1927. Bituminous. What is bituminous? I need to look up that word because I think that word is crucial to understanding. Bituminous definition. Okay, of containing of the nature of bitumen. Okay, what is bitumen? A black viscous mixture of hydrocarbons obtained naturally or as a residue from petroleum distillation. It is used for road surfacing. So it's like what they use to make asphalt and stuff like that. Let's put that word in the chat. That's an interesting word to learn today. Bitumen. Hold on. We're going to put that right there. Bitumen. Okay. Also used in Australian just to mean road. Okay. So this is bitumen. Hopefully we can get that out there. Oh wait, hold on. Okay, hold on. Hold on. All right. Good. Okay. Sorry about that. Just wanted to know what that meant. All right. Its founding immediately followed the defeat of the UMWA in the bituminous coal strike of 1927, the result of the reactionary policies of John L. Lewis. After a strike which lasted over a year, and despite the efforts of the Save the Union Committee, Lewis signed a separate agreement for the Illinois district. This move left the men in the Pittsburgh area with nothing to do but to go back to work. Almost overnight, all the gains of the past 30 years of bitter struggle against the mine operators had been wiped out. Splits and dual unions developed throughout the minefields where the union had once been strong. Conditions of the miners deteriorated very rapidly. Upon arriving in Pittsburgh, I proceeded immediately to the Yugoslav Hall, where a meeting of the Central Strike Committee was proceeding. Representatives from all fields had assembled to vote on the strike and issue the general strike call. Foster, Jack Johnstone, Alfred Wagenknecht, and Jack Stachel from the National TUUL office were all there and all spoke. But most impressive to me were the speeches of the organizers from the coal fields. Ike Hawkins, veteran black miner whom I had met as a delegate to the 5th RILU Congress, and Tom Myerscough, who had made the cold turkey speech at the American Commission of the Comintern in early 1929, spoke on the miserable conditions in the coal fields and the determination of the miners to fight back. It was a fight for survival dramatically reflected in the strike slogan, "Fight against starvation." To this, the miners added another, as well starve fighting as the starve working in the mines. Interesting. As well starve fighting as to starve working in the mines. Okay, so basically it's better to die, starving, fighting for your rights, than to starve not fighting for your rights, going kilometers down into the earth to retrieve bitumen. This should be the title of today's episode, Bitumen. I was assigned as union organizer to the Pricedale region, about 30 miles south of Pittsburgh. The region included some of the largest mines of the Pittsburgh Coal Company, the biggest of all the coal companies. I arrived in town on a late Sunday afternoon in the midst of that morning and was one of the few leaders whom I had not seen at the Central Strike Committee meeting in Pittsburgh. He had been sent on a tour of the fields to pep up the morale of the strikers. A veteran of the copper miners' struggles in Buttes, Montana, and of the coal miners' strike in Illinois. He was a skilled orator who was able to speak authoritatively on the issues. I, on the other hand, knew nothing of the mining industry. On the train down from Pittsburgh, I had carefully read the strike call, acquainted myself with the miners' vernacular, and committed the demands to memory. These included an increase in pay, the 8-hour workday, and recognition of the NMU. I was introduced by Cut Grant, the chairman of the local strike committee. I repeated verbatim what I had learned from the call and summarized the discussion of the strike committee in Pittsburgh. My remarks were on the whole well received, but I had quickly noticed that only a few black miners were at the meeting. I had been informed that the Pricedale mine had a large black force. Where were they? It seemed that while blacks were the backbone of the strike in the immediate areas around Pittsburgh, Library, for example, they had not responded well to the strike in this region. I was later to learn from some black miners that the probable cause for this was that blacks around Pittsburgh had come up from the South earlier. They were older in the mines and had become fairly well integrated into the mine force. Many had obtained official posts at the NMU locals. This had its ironical side. In many locals, blacks worked with recent European immigrants. In some places, the latter were even the majority. But blacks were elected to union positions, president, vice president, or secretary, because they were the only ones who could speak English. In Pricedale, however, blacks had come into the mines later, most of them brought in as strike breakers as late as 1927. Against this background, the difficulties that confronted me as a union leader in the area were obvious. I, a black man, found myself the leader of a mass of white miners with strong racial prejudices. They didn't understand why the blacks had not come out on strike. They seemed to expect that black miners should forget about racist incidents that occurred during the last strike, job discrimination in the mines, and segregation in the company patches, areas where the mines built company-owned housing and company stores. Interesting, very interesting situation. So, he's out here in Pittsburgh organizing with the communist leaders who are trying to organize this strike of miners who are doing a very dangerous job for very little benefits. They didn't even have the 8-hour workday at the time. And so, Harry, being a black man, is, trying to get the black workers to come out. But the black workers in his area where he's organizing don't want to strike because they were brought in as strike breakers. They were scabs before. Plus, they're coming from the South, and a lot of these brothers are on survival mode. And also, they've been dealing with racism from these white European immigrants who are working in the mines with them. And also, during the last strike that went on, the white European immigrants are being racist towards them. So it's a very interesting situation. We have a black man who's a leader in the Communist Party leading these white workers who are upset that black workers aren't with them protesting as well, which goes to show that capitalism is one thing. Yes, we all have a common enemy in capitalism, but white supremacy and anti-black racism is another issue that we need to address. It is the cornerstone of capitalism and this economic exploitative system that we live under, and it needs to be addressed simultaneously and also directly separately. But let's continue here. Cut Grant, a slightly built, wiry figure, was a strong and courageous fighter of many mine battles and a recognized rank-and-file leader. He was also afflicted with the white chauvinist illness. I remember how his face fell when I stepped on the platform and Bill Dunn introduced me as the NMU organizer. There was a sharp contrast between his enthusiastic introduction of Dunn and his apologetic tone in introducing me. I must say, however, the attitude of the white miners was cordial and even friendly to me. I was a union N-word, their words. So he's helping them gonna fight for their rights, an 8-hour workday, not having to dig in the mine with their bare hands, all that stuff. And these white workers are calling him a union N-word, and therefore different from their black fellow miners, who they were upset with because, they didn't want to be with the same racist white folks fighting for their rights. So, yeah, it's just all bad all around. But I overheard mutterings. Why don't these damn N-words come out? And I knew that they expected me to do something about getting them out. It was my first experience in such a situation. What a tricky, tricky time to be alive. Gonna continue here. There was a sizable number of South Slavs in the area, including Adam Ghetto, a young second-generation American who was the party organizer. He immediately took me in tow, introduced me to his father, mother, aunts, and cousins. While the elderly Slavs spoke little or no English, we were able to communicate as I spoke Russian to them and they spoke Croatian to me, a kindred Slav tongue. I soon became known throughout the area as the Black Slav. It felt good to know I had some sort of a base, however tenuous, in the Yugoslav community, which included a sizable number of the miners in the area. The ethnic picture in my section included a minority of Anglo-Irish, old-timers in the mines, many of whom had come from the South, a sizable number of South Slavs, and the blacks. I became immersed in the work of the strike. Our immediate target was to close down the Pricedale mine. Every day there were picket lines. Finally, we called a special day. Every shop in the town closed. All the small merchants turned out for the picket line. The line was led by Cuts Grant, Ghetto, and myself. The state police were also out in force. They were a hard-bitten lot. Each looked like a one-man army with 30-30 Springfield rifles in their saddle holsters. 45 Colts, long riot clubs, and helmets. I sized them up as ex-Marines and former Army non-coms. As I passed by, I overheard the corporal say to one of his men, "See that N-word there? He's the Union leader. Keep an eye on him," trying to scare me off. crazy. It's crazy how repressive America was and still is to people unionizing and fighting for their working rights. Apologies. I'm just so sad. I'm so sad. I just getting worked up emotionally over this. In addition to the state police, there was the coal and iron police, private cops employed by the coal companies. They carried on a campaign of terror in the company patches and around the mines. Just a few days before I arrived, they had smashed a picket line at Pricedale using tear gas, clubs, and machine guns. 3 miners were shot. It was the worst rioting in western Pennsylvania bituminous fields in 9 years. This word will haunt us today. Bituminous. Bituminous. The black miners were not responding to our organizing efforts, however, and the Pricedale mine stayed open. It occurred to me that I might use the Scottsboro issue as a handle. I talked it over with Ghetto and Grant, suggesting that a meeting supporting the Scottsboro defense be called jointly by the National Miners Union and the League of Struggle for Negro Rights. There was no LSNR in the field, but I felt that as National Secretary, I had the authority to use the name. I suggested we try to get hold of the ILD's famous black orator, Richard B. Moore, who was touring the country on behalf of the Scottsboro Boys. I also suggested we issue a special leaflet to the black miners, advertising the meeting, asking them to come out and hear the latest on the Scottsboro Boys. They agreed, and we put out a leaflet which also included the special demands of the black miners against discrimination. The meeting was held on a hot Sunday afternoon under a large tree in Fairdale, a neighboring town where our strike headquarters were set up. Several thousand people, miners and their families, turned out, and for the first time black faces were among them. It seemed the entire black community had come out. Richard B. Moore was at his best. He spoke for over 2 hours about the international situation, the crisis, unemployment, Scottsboro, and the miners' strike. He linked them all up together and was frequently interrupted by applause as his ideas struck home with the audience. He ended with a rousing plea for unity of black and white miners in the strike. People were just spellbound. Cuts Grant came over to me, eyes moist with emotion. He could hardly speak. I've never heard a speaker like that before. Moore's speech seemed to have purged Grant of his white chauvinism. I believe he joined the party the next day, and the black miners at Pricedale joined the strike. Beautiful. Once again, there are so many images and moments in this book that are just hard to fathom, even for today. Richard B. Moore, if I remember right, was a white man. Richard B. Moore was a white man, a white communist leader trying to get these poor folk in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to strike for an 8-hour workday, something we take for granted now. The fact that people only have to work 8 hours a day, because before you were down in the mines for 12 hours, busting your ass. And let's remember, guys, the people that got all the rights for Americans and workers around the world were the socialists, the leftists, the straight up scary ass Marxists and the communists. Those are the people. So this white man stands in front of this group of a divided community, mostly white workers, and goes on and on and on for 2 hours. For 2 hours in a rousing speech about how racism is evil, how it's connected to the exploitation that white supremacy and capitalism bring to people. And he does that so much that it makes a racist white man join the Communist Party the next day. That's radical. That's radical and that's beautiful, and those are the moments in this book that are like some of the most moving. Because that's hard to even get to today. As I said in my last live stream, most white people don't understand the interconnections and interdimensions of racism and capitalism and how they connect to work to keep us all oppressed and divided. So this is a very, very powerful book, and I love those small moments like that in this text. Continuing here. Murder in the coal fields. Every weekend, Ghetto and I would go to Pittsburgh to attend the Central Strike Committee meeting. Often Cut Grant would accompany us. Organizers from all the fields would be present. We'd get the latest news of the strike, how it was proceeding in other fields, report our own situation, and receive new instructions. We would communicate this to the miners in our region on our return. Returning one Monday morning, I crossed the bridge at Monessen and was met by some miners from my section. "Have you heard what happened?" they said, rushing up to me. They informed me that the company goons, the coal and iron police, killed Flipovich right on his front porch, with his whole family watching. I was shocked. Flipovich was an ex-miner who had become a small storekeeper. His store was right across the street from the Pricedale Company patch. He and his wife and several children lived above the store, and we had our miners' relief station in his basement. Everyone knew him as a strong partisan of the miners, and he was well liked by all, except the company thugs who were out to get him. We proceeded to Fairsdale, but could only get within several blocks of the store. There were crowds of miners and their families milling around, and I found out exactly what had happened. Flipovich and his family had been sitting on their porch the evening before when some company thugs had come out and fired point blank at him from the company patch across the street. He had jumped up and rushed his family through the door, shouting, "Don't kill the children." It was then that he was shot, though none of his children were hurt. Let's not take all our rights that we have as workers for granted, because people literally got murdered for them, man. This guy, old white guy, Flipovich, judging by his name, which is a crazy name, by the way, got murdered by the police because he was helping the miners who were trying to strike to have an 8-hour workday and a few benefits. Come on now, this is crazy. This is crazy. Shut those. All police are basically fascists. All cops are bastards, and they are all fascists. All police are bastards, and they are fascists. They killed this old man in front of his children just because he was helping feed the miners. Crazy. The reaction was tremendous anger throughout the coal fields at this cold-blooded murder. At the funeral, miners, their families, and sympathizers gathered from all the coal fields around. A Yugoslav priest conducted the service, and Adam Ghetto gave the eulogy. The anger of the people was so strong. It was clear the operators couldn't get away with it this time. The state prosecutor was forced to try the case. The killers were found guilty and sentenced to long prison terms. That's dope. That's one of the few times. If a white man is murdered by the police, then maybe there will be justice. That's unheard of even today. Police shoot anybody in America, you get invited to the White House nowadays in 2025. Continuing here. The last holdout mines in our area were too near Bentleyville, Charleroi, and Hillman. If there's anybody from Pennsylvania up in the chat, which I doubt is likely because we have 0 listeners right now, and which is why I'm talking so reckless, but I'm keeping it real as well. If we have anybody from Pennsylvania up in the chat, let us know what these areas are like, because let us know if these areas are even still around, if they might be ghost towns now. Bentleyville, Charleroi, and Hillman. Let us know. So they were situated on a hill outside the town limits, just off a public highway. Every time we had attempted to picket these mines, the coal and iron thugs would mount machine guns across the road, thus blocking our attempts to close them down. We all knew this crude violation of the rights of the miners could only take place with the collusion of the state police, who were curiously absent on such occasions. Over several weeks, we planned and organized for an attack to break through this blockade. With the help of the Central Strike Committee, we mobilized miners from neighboring coal fields for a march on these mines. The morning of the march, thousands of miners and their wives assembled at the foot of the hill leading up to the mines. The coal and iron thugs had placed across the road 3 machine guns, which glistened in the morning sun. Cut Grant, Ghetto, and myself were to lead the march, facing machine guns, just marching for an 8-hour workday. Facing machine guns to march for an 8-hour workday. Crazy. While we were gathering, the state police, who have been conspicuously absent in past confrontations with gunmen, made their appearance in the person of a young lieutenant and a sergeant who drove up in a car. Standing on the running board, the lieutenant warned us, "Don't march up that hill. You'll all be killed. Don't follow your leaders," he said, pointing at Adam, Cut, and me. "They are Russian communists trying to lead you into a trap." The Russian communists are leading you into a trap. Please don't make us kill you. This is what the state police, the Pennsylvania state police, show up and look at these striking miners who are trying to block their employer from bringing in scabs and saying, "Please don't make us kill you because you want 8-hour workdays and a fair wage." Crazy. Please don't make us kill you because you see that black guy over there? He is a Russian agent. Crazy. Crazy. Voices from the crowd responded, "Isn't this a public road? What right have they to block it? Why don't you clear them off it? Let's march," they shouted. The crowd surged forth, with Cut, Ghetto, and myself in the lead. Here I am, I thought, over the top again, but in another kind of war this time, against the enemy at home. No weapons, no artillery support, just militant and determined miners. Some had clubs, others picked up rocks, and a few, I'm sure, had handguns concealed under their coats, despite our efforts to discourage them. So we began the march slowly up the hill, expecting at any moment to be blown apart by the company thugs who now had the 3 machine guns pointing directly at us. How brave do you have to be, man? Come on, man. Harry was a G. This is gangsta activity. Y'all get scared just looking at videos of people finger pointing. This man was walking down in rural Pennsylvania, bumfuck middle of nowhere Pennsylvania, leading an army of white men and some black men in front of machine guns. Marching. Come on now. This is real gangsta shit. You can't get, what's realer than that? If that's not real, what you call that? The atmosphere was tense with expectancy. We got about 50 feet from them when they suddenly picked up their guns and moved them to the side of the road. Hard. That's hard. Back onto company property. All been a bluff. We surged past with a deafening hoorah and established our picket lines on the public road in front of the mines. Bentleyville mines were struck that day. Now all the mines in our section were on strike. The mines were closed tight for several months, during which the miners had excellent morale and lighting spirit. A back to work movement started slowly in the 4th month of the strike. At first, it was scarcely perceptible, but when more and more miners failed to show up at a local strike committee meetings, it was clear that the demoralization was setting in. Behind this was the stark fact of starvation for the miners and their families. The relief efforts headed by Wagenknecht were inadequate to maintain a long, drawn-out strike. Brazilian View says, very interesting, man. Shout out to Brazilian View. Shout out to all of Brazil, man. Shout out to Lula. Lula is a G. Our favorite president on this channel is Lula. And our favorite politician in the world is AOC. We love Bay and we love Lula. We love Lula and we love AOC on this channel. Anyway, continuing here. Okay, and also, fuck Bolsonaro. Fuck Bolsonaro and much love to Lula. Okay? Anyway, Ghetto, an old hand in the minefields, warned me of what to expect. As the feeling that the strike is being lost grows, it is often accompanied by terroristic actions, particularly among the young miners, blowing up tipples, wrecking property and buildings. We organizers and some of the more militant miners, however, were reluctant to admit defeat. At the beginning of the Back to Work movement, many rank-and-file leaders and even union organizers continue to give rosy reports at the Central Strike Committee meetings. Yes, a few scabs are crawling back, but the main mass of miners are solid in support of the strike. Then the Comintern representative, the German Ewert, appeared at a meeting of the communist fraction of the strike committee. As I recall, he kept insisting on exact information on the Back to Work movement. Clearly, he was suspicious of the glowing reports from many comrades. He stressed that if the trend was there and growing, that we must be prepared for a strategic retreat. Retreat, such a word, was strictly taboo. Some organizers looked at him as though he were a scab and argued, that's just what the operators would like us to do. Even Foster seemed unfamiliar with the idea of voluntary retreat. The term was evidently not in his lexicon of strike strategy. If we are facing defeat, we should go down fighting. This seemed to be the common opinion. But Ewert quickly pointed out that if we chose this course, we would find all our militants outside of the mines blacklisted and our union destroyed. Okay, so what is to be done here? The strike is not going so well. They've been striking for months. The workers are getting hungry. There's only so much support you can have when people are not working. You get what I'm saying? And these are men with families. Once again, the 8-hour workday and all the benefits that we have as workers came at extreme sacrifice. How many wives do you think bitched at their husbands? Why are you following that N-word who speaks Russian? Baby, you need to get back into the mines. Baby, why are you a part of this union with all those dirty N-words? You need to get back into the mines. Baby, your babies are going hungry. Stop hanging with those communist N-words and go down into the mines. How many white women do you think bitched at their husbands and then got a proper backhand? How many white women got so many backhands from their drunk, unemployed, striking communist husbands? How many women suffered backhands from their husbands, and how many guys got a lip full and an earful from their wives because they were striking? How many? I don't know. Anyway, the term was evidently not in his lexicon of strike strategy. If we are facing defeat, we should go down fighting. This seemed to be the common opinion. But Ewart quickly pointed out that if we chose this course, we will find all our militants outside of the mines blacklisted and our union destroyed. On the other hand, if we recognized our defeat, understood the miners simply could not stay out any longer, we would be able to keep our militants in the mines, prevent ourselves from becoming isolated, and regroup our forces to fight again. The logic of this position was unassailable, and after several meetings, we were won over. We returned to the fields and called meetings of the strikers. The position made sense to them, but our action was not taken soon enough. Thousands of our best miners had already been locked out. But the rank-and-file movement among miners did not end. Early in 1932, 8,000 miners in the Kentucky fields went out under the leadership of the NMU. This historic strike was carried out under conditions of guerrilla warfare. After bitter struggle in which many were killed, this strike was also broken. Crazy. Summation of the strike. The 12-week miners' strike ended in a defeat for the workers, the failure of the party and especially party leadership to summarize the strike and thoroughly master the lessons learned from it contributed to the demise of the NMU, a red trade union. All right, interesting. So he's admitting this is a defeat. They went to war and several factors, resulted in this defeat. It was, just the militancy of the reactionary capitalists and the police collaborating with them. The lack of support for maintaining these miners over this set of time while they're out of work. There were several factors that led to this. And also just, people, failing to have discipline, scabs going back to work, people misreporting on what's happening in the field. So there were many things. So the strike was carried out at a time when the mining industry itself was in the throes of deep crisis. Mass unemployment prevailed and starvation was an immediate reality for thousands of miners and class fighters. The economic crisis was nationwide, but the mining region of western Pennsylvania were particularly hard hit. As a resolution of the ECCI summarized it, under these conditions, the party should have been feverishly working to prepare for the miners' strike, building local organizations of the party and of the red trade unions. Some effort was made in this direction immediately before the strike, but on the whole, the party organization was in a weak and neglected state when the strike did break out. This situation was aggravated by the fact that after the strike began, our leadership was unaware of the necessity and importance of strengthening, extending, and building local party and trade union organizations as the backbone of successful strike strategy. Many leading comrades were brought in to aid in the struggle, but mainly the higher levels of the strike apparatus were strengthened, while the local levels were almost entirely neglected. Because the strike leadership did not make the building of local organizations an urgent priority, it did not realize that they were in danger of becoming isolated from the broad masses of strikers. Underlying these mistakes was a lack of clarity on the basic line guiding the party's work in this struggle. The key obstacle was the inability to link up the task of developing the party with the no less urgent task of doing everything possible to win the miners' strike. Our work during the strike suffered from separating these tasks and emphasizing one at the expense of the other. Our main objective, simply put, was to revolutionize the striking miners, to show by our actions in the strike and through propaganda and agitation that in the communist who advocated and carried through that it is the communist who advocated and carried through the correct strike strategy and tactics. Material success is not always possible in a strike and is not an absolute prerequisite for determining the success or failure of a strike. At the same time, it must never be forgotten that there can be no political success in a strike without a serious struggle for the material improvement of the strikers. The strike leadership did not see it was pursuing an entirely one-sided course when it insisted on holding out to the last man. The result of these errors was the failure of the strike committee to lead an orderly and well-organized retreat. The strike committee was not linked closely enough with the miners in the fields. This close and intimate connection was one thing that would have enabled the leadership to take measures in sufficiently good time to prepare for the possibility of a strategic retreat. Instead, the leaders continued to listen to the optimistic and honey-coated reports of its traveling representatives and discouraged rank-and-file miners from expressing their doubts about continuing the strike by labeling all such miners as scabs. This existed to such an extent that the strike leadership did not even notice that at the end of the strike, we were leading a minority of the workers. In the end, the miners simply could not stay out any longer because of the widespread starvation and police terror. The party's refusal to organize for the possibility of a retreat left us isolated and to a certain extent discredited. Thousands of the most militant and courageous fighters were locked out, blacklisted and evicted by the coal operators. The NMU was decimated by the coal operators, and thenceforward we were unable to build it into a powerful, independent union. So once we're going to be critical of these socialist parties and their movements, right? And we're not just going to sugarcoat everything and just, suck Harry Haywood's dick. There were like mistakes that they made here. There were serious mistakes that they made here and just ill-preparedness. We should always remember, though, that the Communist Party at this point in history was still very young as well. And these were, very young men. Very young men from vastly different backgrounds and very young women as well, with the international goal of trying to overthrow the capitalist system. And there will be some mistakes. On the road to socialism, there will be many mistakes made and battles won, battles lost, etc. So I find this very interesting as he's breaking down, where he failed, even after doing so much heroic work in Pennsylvania. Continuing here, leading the party's Afro-American work. I returned to New York from the miners' strike in September 1931. Shortly thereafter, I was co-opted to the Central Committee with the privilege of sitting in on meetings of the Politburo. B.D. Amos, the former head of the Negro Department, was sent to Ohio, and I was named to fill his position. In my new job, a large part of my time was devoted to the Scottsboro campaign, which was a major effort of the party in the Black liberation struggle. It is difficult to fully assess the tremendous impact Scottsboro had on the party's political development in that period. Every area of work, every mass organization we were involved in was strengthened by our participation in this defense campaign. Through our militant working class policy, we were able to win workers of all nationalities to take up the special demands of black people embodied in the Scottsboro defense. I'll never forget how the immigrant workers in the Needle Trades Union would sing "Scottsboro Boys Shall Not Die" in their various Eastern European and Yiddish accents. International solidarity. It's beautiful. In the South, the movement awakened the great mass of the black peasantry and resulted in the building of the militant Sharecroppers Union, which embraced thousands of land-starved black croppers and poor farmers. Scottsboro helped pave the way for the growth of the Unemployed Councils and the CIO. The International Labor Defense, ILD, which had been initiated by the party in 1925 to fight for the freedom of political prisoners like Tom Mooney and Warren Billings, became the main mass organization in Scottsboro. The Mooney case and others like it were linked to the Scottsboro frame-up and became instrumental in winning white workers to the fight for the freedom of the Scottsboro Boys. Scottsboro marked the first real bid of the party and the black working class for leadership in the black liberation struggle. Within the national movement, black workers emerged as a force independent of the reformists and greatly strengthened by their role as part of the working class generally. By the end of 1931, we had effectively won hegemony in the defense efforts. Although the NAACP did not formally withdraw from the defense until January 1932, we were already in de facto control, the boys and their parents having signed up with the ILD. The thrust of our policy, emphasizing the primacy of mass struggle for the freedom of the boys, has succeeded to a large extent in discrediting and isolating the reformist, liberal NAACP leadership. This fact, however, did not mean that the right reformist danger of compromise and capitulation in the black freedom movement had been eliminated. On the contrary, its proponents continued to probe our positions, seeking weak spots which they could exploit to stage a comeback. Within the party, these influencers were reflected in the underestimation of the objective class role of the reformist leadership as an agency of the white ruling class within the black movement. Underlying this was the tendency to ignore class differences in the black community, the naive and anti-Marxist assumption that all blacks as members of an oppressed nation were revolutionary or potentially so. This attitude persisted despite the treachery of the NAACP leaders in the Scottsboro struggle. In practice, it was manifested in the tendency to rely on local black leaders, particularly the clergy, in the building of local united fronts and the failure to involve the masses below. Often within these united fronts, the party failed to place elementary conditions for struggle against the ruling class as the basis for unity, and thus failed to maintain the independent role of the party, its freedom of action, and propaganda. So basically what he's trying to say here is that the party, is highlighting, some of the major issues around racism, capitalism, exploitation, by focusing on leading the defense for the freedom of the Scottsboro boys. But at the same time, it's not, doing a good job at messaging that we are a separate entity than the NAACP. We are different. We have a different set of goals and end objectives that we're trying to reach. So that's what he's trying to get at here. Okay, let's continue. So this struggle against the right reformist danger was often made more difficult by left sectarian errors, manifested primarily in a resistance to building the broadest possible united front. As head of the Negro Department, I felt it was my job to push the fight against reformism in the black community and its reflections in the party. This, I felt, was essential, not only to the Scottsboro struggle, but also to secure our long-term strategic objective, winning of the hegemony of black workers in the liberation struggle. I pursued this line in speeches, lectures, in training classes for party cadres, and in my writings during the period. In those days, the South was considered the main concentration point for the development of the black liberation movement. As head of the National Negro Department and Central Committee representative to the South, I was expected to follow closely the development of the party's work in that region. It was therefore necessary to acquaint myself with its practical as well as theoretical problems. My plan was to spend at least 3 or 4 months a year in the South. My first trip south was to Charlotte, North Carolina, in the spring of 1932. Shout out to the Queen City. Everybody's moving to Charlotte. Charlotte is the new Atlanta. Have BBLs hit Atlanta? Have BBLs hit Charlotte yet? I'm sorry. Continuing here. Charlotte, located near the foothills of the Piedmont, was the geographic center of the growing southern textile industry. The industry had grown up as a result of the runaway shots from New England, bent on tapping the cheap labor supply of poverty-stricken white farmers fleeing the uplands. Gastonia, the scene of the historic strike in the spring of 1929, which had been led by the party in TUUL, was only 20 miles from Charlotte. Charlotte was also the headquarters of the party's North Carolina district. At the time of my visit, it was quiet, but there were stirrings in the mills around the area, rumblings of a new wave of strikes, which were to break out the following July. Unemployment was the main issue among both black and white workers. Unemployment was growing as a result of the inhuman stretch-out, speed-up system Blacks were still a minority in the mills, working only in cleanup jobs, sweeping and janitorial work. They were the lowest of the low. The party had carried through some demonstrations for unemployment relief. Some of the stalwarts from the Gastonia strike, who had been locked out of the mills, had moved into Charlotte, providing the backbone of the party in Charlotte, at least among whites. The party had won sympathy among blacks as a result of the Scottsboro issue and its strong position against discrimination in the shops. An ILD branch had been set up, and there was a good Scottsboro movement in town. All right, Brazilian View said humans make mistakes, not necessarily an economic system failure. I absolutely get your point, but personally afraid of liberty's limitations. Are you talking about you're afraid of the limitation of liberties under a communist government or system? I think we should also, I'm not trying to do whataboutism, but what about all of these civil liberties that are stripped away under a capitalist economic and political system? I think protecting our civil liberties is absolutely important. And, the right to have freedom of religion, freedom of movement, freedom of expression, a press that is free, all that sort of stuff is vitally important. But we should also think about the limits of our freedom under a capitalist system where if you don't have the money, you can't have the opportunity to, express yourself or have platforms, right? For example, me running this YouTube channel takes some amount of privilege. I have to have access to internet. I have to have access to strong electricity. I have to be able to, pay for these lights and Wi-Fi, which I all do. I'm not reporting from my mama's basement. I'm making this video from my kitchen table in my apartment that I pay a high amount of rent for every single month. You get what I'm saying? And what if I didn't have the money? I wouldn't be able to have the time to be reading communist texts online. You get what I'm saying? If I don't have the money in my country, I can't get health care in so many ways. So there are liberties that are restricted by us not having economic parity or equity, I would say. So that's a lot to break down. I'm trying to read in between your lines. Brazilian View, I probably assume that you're not a native English speaker, so it might be hard to express yourself. But I love your comments. So shout out to Brazilian View for that wonderful comment. But anyway, I'm going to continue here. The party was partially underground, and its members worked in the unemployed councils, ILD and the National Textile Union, which had never really recovered after the Gastonia defeat. There was an unemployed headquarters downtown, which consisted of an office and a fairly large hall, where the ILD also held meetings. Party meetings were generally small and held in the homes of comrades. Most of the top party leadership was from the north. Richards, the district organizer, was of Finnish-American extraction and hailed from Wisconsin, where he had formerly been D.O. Army Schechter district operator. Amy Schechter was a Jewish Cockney. Born in London, she was a college-educated intellectual, but she still retained a thick Cockney accent. She was one of the original Gastonia 7 who were charged with the murder of the chief of police. Their case was finally won in the Supreme Court. There was also Dave Duran of the Young Communist League. He later became political commissar of the Lincoln Brigade and was killed on the Aragonian front in Spain. My God. The outstanding local comrade was a steadfast black woman, Ann Withers. My visit to Charlotte was brief. I sat in on a few meetings in the district discussing preparations for marches on the issue of unemployment relief and the upcoming election campaign. I then returned to New York and reported on my visit. And that's the end of chapter 13, doing great party work out there in Pennsylvania and also trying to organize and strategize in the South. That was fascinating. We're going to be reading chapter 14. So today, everybody, you're getting a 2-for-1. I'm reading two chapters. So we're going to finish chapter 14, and then we're going to call it a day. Shout out to everybody jumping in the chat and showing love. Once again, hearts to everybody showing love. Heart to Brazilian View. Heart Brazilian View for showing his way, for showing up. Brazilian View could be doing anything. He could be chasing big booty Brazilians around all day, but he's here on live stream with us. Guys, we have a celebrity with us. Comrades. we have a foreigner in our live stream who could be doing wonderful things like chasing big booty Brazilians on Ipanema. Instead, he is here with us. We should be proud. We should be proud that we're reaching, or that we're reaching people out there. Anyway, chapter 14, reunion in Moscow. 1932 was a presidential election year. We communists greeted it as an opportunity to popularize our program before the millions of people impoverished by the economic crisis and ruling class offensive, as well as to stimulate and strengthen all the campaigns the party was engaged in. By this time, the party had built considerable influence among the masses through an increasingly successful struggle against right dangers. We concentrated a good deal of attention on the struggle for unemployment insurance and immediate relief. Hunger marches on state capitals had taken place throughout the country, culminating with nationwide marches on Washington in December of 1931 and 32. In the struggle of employed workers, the party found itself increasingly at loggerheads with William Greene and the AFL. For instance, he supported Hoover's wage cut policies, against which we had waged many successful battles. In direct defiance of the AFL's no-strike pledge, the party and the TUUL were leading strikes in the Kentucky mines and the needle trades. Poor and middle farmers were then revolting against widespread evictions and foreclosures throughout the Midwest, and in December 1932, farmers from across the country held a national relief conference in Washington. As a result, the Farmers National Committee of Action was set up, raising such demands as no forced sales or evictions of poor farmers, cash relief, reduction in rents and taxes, and an end to the oppression of Afro-American people. With mass demonstrations and meetings throughout the country to free the Scottsboro Boys, the party was becoming a respected leader among blacks. We also helped organize the National Bonus March in July 1932. Some 25,000 veterans marched to Washington, demanding adjusted service pay, standing against the danger of imperialist war, and for the defense of the Soviet Union and the Chinese people. That's based. Now that's really based. We began preparing for the presidential campaign early in 1932, nominating a national slate of William Z. Foster for president and James W. Ford for vice president. Ford was called back from Germany, where he had been chairman of the International Trade Union Committee of Negro Workers. I had been briefly considered for vice president, but it felt generally that my appearance was too youthful. You look too young. You look too young to be president. Still interesting, the first Communist Party national ticket for president, a white man and a black man working together. A white man and a black man. Beautiful. You still haven't seen that since, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Anyway, though the party's vote was small, about 103,000, we used the campaign to broadly publicize our minimum and maximum programs. We had a slate of congressional candidates, among whom were many blacks. The party was on the ballot in 40 states and conducted an aggressive campaign. Hundreds of mass meetings were held throughout the country, 7 million leaflets distributed, and 1 million pamphlets sold. All this in the face of vicious police harassment and repression. I don't really believe that the final vote was an accurate reflection of the party's influence at that time, particularly in the South, where the black masses were almost entirely disenfranchised. I gotta say this, I think electoral politics are good ways to advertise. And in America, it's extremely expensive. I don't think other people from other countries realize, like in America, you pay to get your ass on the ballot. And you have to do so much to get on the ballot. For every election, you have to get 100,000 signatures or something like that just to qualify to be on the ballot. Then you got to pay, then you got to advertise, then you got to market. So big business runs the show for elections. But I do think it's important for leftist parties to be on those ballots as much as possible. It's very unlikely that we're going to win those elections, right? But during 2024, right, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, was on my ballot for Louisiana. And I'm pretty certain a lot of people in Louisiana saw that, maybe got interested in it, looked up the party, maybe voted for them, who knows, right? But it's a good way to advertise. your party as well. Now, bourgeoisie, liberal electoral politics will not bring about the proletarian revolution. It won't, have all of our bosses on a chopping block. That's not going to happen. But it is a great way to advertise, and it should be used in conjunction with many different ways of agit-prop. It's agitation propaganda, I would say. That's how I look at it. But to each their own. Right now, the CPUSA wants us to vote for Democrats. So, in the summer of 1932, 19-year-old Angelo Herndon, a YSCL member, was arrested in Atlanta, Georgia. Herndon was charged with incitement to insurrection under an old 1861 fugitive slave statute. Much of what I learned was from my brother, Otto, who was in Atlanta at the time and worked actively in the campaign. That June, the Fulton County Commissioners had announced that there was no more money for relief. After all, there was no need for relief, they said. There was no one in the city of Atlanta who was starving. Then they invited any stray soul who might be hungry to come to their offices, and they would investigate the situation. The Communist Party and the unemployed councils immediately took them up on their offer. They mobilized 1,000 people, black and white, to come to the county courthouse and demand relief. The meeting itself was historic, the first time that such a large meeting of black and white workers had taken place in the South. Herndon described its significance in his autobiography. It was a demonstration of the Southern workers' power. Like a giant that had been lying asleep for a long time, he now began to stir. Atlanta's ruling circles were appropriately alarmed, and the next day they found $6,000 for relief, which might have been like $60,000 at that time. 1 week later, Angelo Herndon was arrested. His trial was an example of Georgia lynch justice, and the local rulers, through their newspapers, were to use it to sensationalize the Red Jew scare for many years to come. I think the prosecutor's remarks sum up the situation pretty well. Falling to his knees, the Reverend Hudson told the jury that he expected them to arrive at a verdict that would automatically send this damnable, anarchistic Bolsheviki to his death by electrocution. The good Reverend said that this would satisfy God, and the daughters of the state officials can walk the streets safely. Stamp this thing out now with a conviction. It's always so frustrating to remember that what motivates the right in America is their, fake belief in God, using God as a way to cudgel people into falling into their strict norms and beliefs, and their fear that white women will have sex with anything that is not them. You get what I'm saying? Like, the motivating fear for all the right-wing fascists in America, whether they be MAGA or whether they be the white supremacists that move out to the middle of Montana to start their little incestuous colonies, is just their fake belief in God, the white Jesus that they praise and worship, and the fear that white women will have sex with anything that is not them. That's all it comes down to. And that's how can you be in court and seriously fall in front of your knees in front of a jury of presumably all white men and expect to be taken seriously saying this type of shit, unless you're in America. In any other country does this shit fly? In any other country are people this ridiculously stupid? Maybe in Hungary, where I am, where God and their fear of the brown Muslim hordes from Turkey consuming them. Maybe in Hungary as well, and other right-wing fascist nations. I don't know. Only in America are we that fucking stupid. Continuing here. Hudson didn't get everything he asked for, but Herndon was sentenced to 18 to 20 years. Before he was sentenced, however, young Herndon told the court, "You may succeed in killing 1, 2, or even a score of working-class organizers, but you cannot kill the working class." In the beginning stages of the case, the ILD had immediately taken charge of the defense, which was then in the hands of the young black attorney, Ben Davis Jr. The case was linked up with the Scottsboro struggle as a symbol of the racist persecution of blacks. A long legal battle ensued. Mass meetings and huge petition campaigns were launched as part of the defense effort. The case was fought through the Supreme Court, which at first sustained the conviction, but ultimately reversed it by a 5-4 decision. Herndon, out on bail, was finally freed in 1937. Beautiful, beautiful. And this is why This is why the Supreme Court is vitally important. We take that into consideration when we do vote, because it was a 5-4 decision. If what? Two people flipped, that man would have spent the rest of his life in jail, possibly died in jail. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, as soon as we had received word of Herndon's arrest, we began planning a nationwide defense campaign. The Negro Department was responsible for developing and carrying out a campaign in support of the ILD. As part of this effort, I made plans to go to Atlanta to see the situation firsthand. Shortly before I was to leave, however, Browder called me into his office and informed me that he had just received a CI, Communist International, request that the American Party send 3 delegates to attend the 12th plenum of the Executive Committee of the Communist International. Browder asked if I would like to go. The meeting was to be in Moscow in early September. He said that he was aware of my desire to bring my wife Ina to the United States, and he suggested that this might be a good opportunity. I, of course, enthusiastically agreed. Just a few days later, I was aboard a ship bound for the Soviet Union with the other 2 delegates, Bob Miner and Henry Puro, a Finnish-American comrade. We arrived in Moscow in mid-August, and I had a joyous reunion with Ina. Not long after our arrival, the 12th plenum of the ECCI convened as scheduled. Its purpose was to analyze the current international situation and check the work of the Comintern sections, the affiliated parties. What happened to Ina? I love saying that, because he barely mentions his wife, and she gets like 3 paragraphs throughout an entire 700-page book. Anyway. The tone was set in the resolution on the international situation. It noted that capitalist stabilization had ended and we were well along in the 3rd period, and that although a revolutionary upsurge was developing in a number of countries, a revolutionary situation had not yet arisen in any important capitalist country. The resolution stressed the danger of war and the preparation for a counter-revolutionary war against the USSR. The enemy, it declared, was both fascism and social fascism, social democracy, which stood for the maintenance and strengthening of capitalism. Only by directing the main blow against social democracy, this social mainstay of the bourgeoisie, it said, will it be possible to strike at and defeat the chief class enemy of the proletariat, the bourgeoisie. In the United States, there had already been mass demonstrations of the unemployed, the Veterans March, and the strike struggles against wage cuts. The resolution called upon the U.S. Party to continue to strengthen its efforts in mobilizing the masses and toward this end to concentrate chiefly on the struggle. Focus on the struggle and concentrate chiefly on the struggle. That's a 1, not an I. 1, for social insurance against wage cuts for immediate assistance of the unemployed. 2, for assistance for the ruined farmers. 3, for the equal rights of the Negroes and the right of self-determination for the Black Belt. It urged the defense of the Chinese people against foreign aggression and defense of the Soviet Union. All right? Brazilian View says, you're the best, man. Ha, 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 ha. I don't know what you mean I'm the best. What do you mean? Tell me, what was so funny? Why did I say that was funny? I look like a clown to you? I look like a clown to you? Do I look like a clown? Am I clowning around? No, I'm not. Anyway. It urged the defense of the Chinese people against foreign aggression, defense of the Soviet Union. There was nothing new in all of this. The party was in agreement with all these points and had taken part in discussions which led to the formulation of his speech. I visited the Lenin School where I reported on the Afro-American work in the party. The student body was completely new to me. There were a number of American black students as well as several South Africans. One was Nzula, the secretary of the South African Communist Party, a brilliant young Zulu communist. Unfortunately, Nzulu died of pneumonia shortly after I left. Oh, that's sad. That's sad. As a black person who's studying abroad right now, that's why I'm in Budapest, Hungary. It's very interesting being amongst these international young people who are obviously coming from very different and possibly very upper class backgrounds in their home countries. And realizing, I might be sitting next to the next, dictator of like Kazakhstan to my left, and the next like radical feminist of the Czech Republic to my right. You know what I mean? Like, it's crazy. I don't know. But yeah, continuing here. In Moscow, I also met members of the black and white film group who had come to the Soviet Union at the invitation of the Mezrabpum Soviet film industry. The 22 young men and women were there to film a story about race and class relations in the southern United States. Among them were the novelist and poet Langston Hughes. Look at that. Langston Hughes just pop up in a text. Langston Hughes just pop up. This is as surprising as seeing W.B. Du Bois hanging with Mao Zedong. I need that picture. I will do this. I will find a way. I need that picture of W.B. Du Bois hanging with Mao Zedong, and I need that framed in color in my living room. Stat. ASAP. Anyway, continuing here. The 22 young men and women were there to film a story about race and class relations in the southern United States. Among them were the novelist and poet Langston Hughes, Louise Thompson, now Louise Thompson Patterson, secretary of the Committee for the Defense of Political Prisoners, and a former social worker and teacher. Ted Poston, a New York journalist, Lauren Miller, a young West Coast intellectual, later a lawyer and judge, and Henry Moon, a writer who later became publicity director of the NAACP. They seemed to be having a good time among the hospitable Russians who went out of their way to show them courtesy. After a stay of several months and a number of attempts to get started, the movie was called off. The reason, according to Mezrabpum officials, was the inadequacy of the scenario. It was not worthy of the kind of picture they had hoped to make, nor were the actors quite what they expected. Did the Russians try to film like the Green Book in Moscow in 1932? Like, what the fuck were they thinking? Like, that was even possible. That's crazy. Anyway, they were a group of intellectuals, not a genuine worker among them, and only one professional actor. Most were from the North and knew little or nothing about the South. Some members of the group, however, contended that the reasons for canceling the project were political, that the Soviets were backing away from the project in order to curry favor with the U.S. government. They claimed that equal rights were being sacrificed and the Soviets were betraying blacks in exchange for diplomatic relations with the United States. At the time, the two countries were about to establish diplomatic relations, and a film depicting racial relations in the U.S. might be considered a violation of the proposed Treaty of Recognition, which enjoined both parties to refrain from hostile propaganda against each other. So, yeah. Brazilian says, the black struggle in the U.S. is well known. I lived in Tennessee for a while and got a first-hand view of the importance of the movement. Shout out to Brazilian View. Going to Tennessee. Did you go to Cashville? Did you go to Memphis? Did you listen to a lot of Project Pat? But shout out to all the brothers and sisters in Tennessee. Though I can assume, being in Tennessee, you couldn't wait to get back to Brazil. I would assume such. I'll just take a wild guess. Anyway, but yeah, the international black struggle against anti-blackness and white supremacy is vitally important, just as much as it is important in Brazil. I've spoken about Brazil in my channel off and on. Maybe we should read a book about anti-blackness or slavery in Brazil or the history of black folks in Brazil. Maybe we should do that in an upcoming live stream. But the struggle against white supremacy, racial capitalism, etc., is also important in Brazil too, where half of the population has African ancestry and the majority of people with economic and political power in the country look like they come from Sweden. Explain that. Explain that. Explain that. It's interconnected, but I'm glad that you see the interconnectedness, and I'm glad that you're all about international solidarity. So anyway, continuing here. They claimed that equal rights were being sacrificed and the Soviets were betraying blacks in exchange for diplomatic relations with the United States. Yeah, we read that part. Some people, they believed the Soviet Union was going to be recognized by the U.S. and the U.S. was going to be upset if they made a race film. So this charge was picked up, embellished, and hurled throughout the world by the capitalist press. Added to it were accounts of poor blacks stranded in Moscow. The New York Tribune headlined a story, Negroes Adrift in Uncle Tom's Russian Cabin. Harlem Expeditionary Unit is stranded in Moscow. That's crazy. That's crazy. The media was lying. The lying, crooked media fake news. A couple of years later, when George Padmore left his post as editor of the New York Worker, organ of the International Trade Union Committee of Negro Workers in Hamburg, he made use of this incident to try to bolster his flimsy charge that the Communist International had deserted the African liberation struggles. These charges were false. According to Langston Hughes, the group was on contract and continued to receive their salaries, higher than any of them had ever earned before. They were staying in a luxurious hotel, were wined and dined by the Russians, and were also invited by the Theatrical Union on a pleasure trip to the Black Sea to visit the resorts of the Crimea and the Caucasus. Langston Hughes also supported the Russians with respect to the inadequacy of the script. In fact, it was he who called their attention to it. He had read the script written by a well-known Soviet scenarist whose knowledge of the contemporary black life was limited to the very few books on the subject which had been translated into Russian. He had evidently studied these and put together what he thought was a highly dramatic story of race relations in the United States. I would like to see the script. Produce the script, good sir. The result, said Hughes, was a script improbable to the point of ludicrousness. It was so interwoven with major and minor impossibilities and improbabilities that it would have seemed like a burlesque on the screen. He told studio officials that, in his opinion, no plausible film could possibly be made from it since, in general, the script was so mistakenly conceived that it was beyond revision. Mesrop-Pum informed the group that they would be paid in full for the duration of their contracts and that transportation via London, Paris, or Berlin back to the U.S. would be available whenever they wished to depart. With regard to the future, 3 choices were offered: exit visas at any time, an extended tour of the Soviet Union before leaving, or permanent residence and jobs for any who desire to remain. Let's remain. Stay. Do not go back. Do not go back. I can't understand why brothers who would leave the U.S., when it was very rare for Americans to leave in general, and very rare for black people to leave, to go to Moscow, to go to Paris, to go to London, to go anywhere, and return to the U.S. I don't get it. It makes no sense to me. So all were invited to stay in the USSR as long as they wished. Langston remained a year, visiting republics in Central Asia and traveling in various parts of the Soviet Union. 2 members of the group stayed permanently. Wayland Rudd, the actor, appeared in Moscow theaters and performed for troops at the front during World War II. Lloyd Patterson, a scene designer who was a graduate of Hampton Institute in Virginia, married a Russian woman and stayed in the Soviet Union, where he died during the Nazi invasion of Moscow. His wife, Vera, was also a scene designer, was a friend of Ina's. Those brothers were the first passport bros, and they did it the right way. They did it the right way. Homer Smith, a former postal employee from Minneapolis, stayed in the Soviet Union until the beginning of World War II. He got a contract from the Russian Postal Service and introduced the first special delivery to Moscow. While I was there, Mother Wright, mother of one of the Scottsboro boys, was on a tour of Russia and spoke to a whole series of mass rallies, culminating in a huge demonstration and parades of tens of thousands of Soviet workers in Moscow. They went through the main streets of Moscow with placards and banners. Free the Scottsboro boys, down with U.S. imperialism, and the Soviet Union, friend of the oppressed blacks. This enthusiastic support of the Russians for the Scottsboro boys further belied their slanders. One day, I dropped in at the Bolshoi Moscow Hotel with some members of the film group. Entering the lobby, I saw my old Kutva schoolmate, Golden, and we ran into a Russian embrace. He had gone back to the States in 1928 and had now returned to the Soviet Union with a new wife, a Polish-American woman. They had settled in Tashkent in Central Asia, where he was professor of English literature at the university. His wife also taught there, and they had a baby daughter. Aww. Shout out to Golden. I forgot if Golden was black. He might have been, but shout out to him. Golden told me what had happened to him in the past years. Back in the U.S., he had found it difficult to fit into party work. I was neither an organizer nor an agitator, and I felt I was too old to acquire these qualities, he said. He was about 40. As you know, I never had any party experience before coming to Russia. He felt that he could perhaps eventually become a teacher of Marxian political economy. You know I was good at that, he said. He was, in fact, an extremely modest and retiring fellow, not one to blow his own horn. I would say the comrades in the States did not know of his qualifications in this respect. He had worked a while as the manager of the party restaurant in New York. Then he was sent as an organizer to Pittsburgh, but as he himself admitted, did a poor job there. He was a loyal communist, however, and it occurred to him that there was one thing he could do for the Soviet Union, and that was to organize a group of black technicians to go there to work. Approaching his old teacher at Tuskegee, the famed Dr. George Washington Carver, all sorts of cameos in this book. All sorts of wild cameos. Langston Hughes, W.B. Du Bois, George Washington Carver. He solicited George Washington Carver's aid, the Peanut Man, in getting together a group of agricultural specialists to go to the Soviet Union. Dr. Carver seemed enthusiastic about the project and immediately sought volunteers from among his former students. That's dope. I did not know George Washington Carver was an ally. You think George Washington Carver was a pinko? You think he was a pinko? Might have been. Seems sympathetic. Anyway, they eventually got together a group of 9 agricultural specialists, agronomists, and agricultural chemists. There was also one young civil engineer, Charles Young, the son of Colonel Young, West Point graduate and highest ranking black officer in the U.S. Army at the beginning of World War I. The whole group signed contracts through the Amtorg, Soviet trading organization in the U.S. Led by Golden, they left for the USSR. Otto told me he saw them off when they sailed from New York. He asked Golden when he was coming back. Repeating a verse on the once popular song, Golden replied, "I'll be back when the elephants roost in the trees." Golden died in Tashkent just before World War II. In addition to his work as a professor, he was at that time a member of the City Soviet. He must have been a very popular man because we heard that the whole town turned out for his funeral. Beautiful. Once again, man, black people been traveling. Can you imagine a brother in Tashkent? Isn't that in Kazakhstan in like 1930 something? Crazy. He's just out there. Well, that's out there, boy. For real. Most of the young black technicians remained permanently married and had families in the Soviet Union. One became head of the largest state poultry farm in the Soviet Union, and another, Sutton, an agricultural chemist from San Antonio, Texas, invented a process for producing rope from rice straw. Okay, so these brothers were really on some passport stuff. As soon as they got out of America, they got Russian women and said, we good, we're chilling, we'll stay. Toodles to America. I can't blame them. That's how you do it, baby. That's how you do it. My desire to bring Ina back to the States was made known to the appropriate authorities. We had no trouble at all. She was immediately given an exit visa. Naturally, her mother was sorry to be separated from her only child, but she approved of Ina's leaving, saying she wanted her daughter to be happy. We left Moscow for Riga, site of the nearest American embassy. The Soviet Union was not recognized by the U.S. at this time. Arriving in Riga, we proceeded at once to the American embassy to get the necessary papers, which would allow Ina to enter the United States as my wife and become a permanent resident. At the time, I thought there was a possibility of getting immediate approval so she could come through with me. I knew that this had happened in some cases, but I was quickly disabused of this naive hope. This man is crazy. He is in, Riga is in Latvia. He arrives in Latvia with his blonde-haired, blue-eyed Russian wife on his arm and goes to the U.S. Embassy and is just expecting a visa. That's crazy. That's crazy. That's crazy. At the embassy, I was subjected to a quiz. The ambassador himself took part in the questioning. I could tell by his accent that he was a polite Southern gentleman. Behind the mask, I could sense the hostility towards me. I told them I was a writer and had spent time in the Soviet Union a couple of years before. There I had met Ina, and we had gotten married. Now I had returned to bring her back with me. They asked me all sorts of questions about the Soviet Union, how I liked it, what it was like. I gave general answers. It was clear they knew all along who I was. Finally, I was told that they didn't handle visas from that office in this connection. I would have to go back to the United States and apply through the immigration department to bring Ina in. They assured me I would have no problem. I should leave Ina in Riga. This, they said, was the normal procedure. The ambassador, keeping up the friendly facade, bade me goodbye in a polite way and wished me luck. Fortunately, we had friends in Riga. The Armenian Vartanian, a member of the Young Communist International, had given us the name of his uncle, a wealthy doctor in the city, who had his own health sanitarium. Ina could stay there as a guest as long as she wanted. Gordon Fiala says, no time, happy to subscribe. Shout out to Gordon. Shout out to everybody showing love. I appreciate that as we continue to read Black Bolshevik, Autobiography of an Afro-American Communist. We're almost done. We're wrapping up chapter 14, and then we're going to call it a day. But shout out to Gordon, showing much love. Power to the people. Power to the people, and much love to Gordon, man. Going to give a shout out to Gordon real quick before we wrap up. But this is crazy. I think what's about to happen is that they're not going to let Harry into America with his blonde-haired, blue-eyed Russian wife from the Caucasus. They're not going to, I wonder why they won't let him do it. He did everything right. He filed all the paperwork. He went to the embassy. He shook hands with the nice ambassador. Why won't they let him come back with his proper snow bunny? Why won't they let this man have his snow bunny? Why? This is the biggest tragedy. We've read about striking workers, machine guns in the face of miners, all sorts of stuff. But this is the ghastly tragedy, the worst thing that could ever happen. But I think we're getting a clue on what happened to Ina. Anyway, the city of Riga was a notorious spy center, a listening post for the U.S. It was the nearest place to gather information on the Soviet Union for U.S. intelligence. Many of the anti-Soviet experts were centered there, and the city served as a lie factory. For example, they reported 20 million people had starved to death in famines in 1932. I was there that year, and while I saw some tightening of the belt as a result of the bad harvest, there was no starvation. All right? Arthur Sage said, damn, even the Peanut Man wanted communism. Ain't that a surprise? George Washington Carver chopping up peanuts, thinking about poisoning the bourgeoisie with a bad batch of peanuts. I don't know, all sorts of wild shit happened back in the day that you didn't know. Anyway, so he said, I was there in 1932, and while I saw some tightening of the belt as a result of the bad harvest, there was no starvation. Then there was even cruder stuff about the nationalization of women, all invented by newspapermen in the bars in Riga. I was in Riga just 3 or 4 days and regretfully left Ina with the doctor and his family. He assured me everything would be all right. We went to the station where I caught the train for Berlin. Ina and I embraced, and she watched as the train pulled out. I never saw her again. So tragic. That's sad as hell. That's crazy. That's crazy. Wait, Ina just, disappeared? Did she get killed? Did she get kidnapped by the Americans? What happened? From Berlin, I went to Bremerhaven and got a passage home on the liner Bremen. Immediately on arrival in the States, I went to the immigration office on Ellis Island to apply for a visa for Ina. Here they were quite rude. I wonder why. One guy asked me, who is she? A communist? We're not letting any communists in, you know. I said, no, she's just a Soviet citizen. They gave me an application to fill out. I then asked when I could hear from them, and they told me it would be a month or so. Why does it take so long? I asked. They said they had to investigate. I kept in close touch with Ina, assuring her that things would turn out all right. I also called the immigration department, constantly inquiring about the application. After several months, I became convinced my application for Ina's visa was being deliberately obstructed by the immigration department itself. So I started my own campaign, assisted by my friend William Patterson, then National Secretary of the International Labor Defense. We felt the best way to get results was to threaten the immigration authorities with public exposure. It was a clear case of discrimination against a black man. They were going to protest the U.S. government from stopping Harry Haywood from having his POG. Bring his POG. Bring his POG. Bring his POG. Can you imagine the United States government at the highest levels, was preventing this black man from having his POG? How dare they? We enlisted the support of several liberals, including the Committee for the Defense of Political Prisoners, headed by the Rabbi Benjamin Goldstein and Malcolm Cowley of the American Civil Liberties Union. They addressed a telegram to the Commissioner of Immigration in Washington, demanding to know the reasons for the delay and denouncing this inhuman treatment. Is it because she is white and Mr. Hall is a Negro? They asked. We got an immediate reply from the commissioner himself. He denied the delay had anything to do with racial discrimination and said he would like to see Mr. Hall down in Washington so we could talk the matter over. Pat and I went down to the office of the commissioner in Washington. Patterson, as my attorney, was on the offensive and launched right in. But the commissioner told him to hold back. There's no discrimination here, he told us, but of course we're not going to let any communist in. We objected, saying she was not a communist, just a citizen of the Soviet Union. Then the commissioner raised the question of my previous marriage. They, as yet, had no proof of the termination of that marriage. I replied that that was no problem. I would get the proof for them. Shortly after I had arrived in Moscow in 1926, I had gotten a letter from my sister Eppa. She told me she had run into Hazel, my former wife. Hazel had told her she had divorced me, was remarried, and had some children. So I assumed there would be no trouble getting confirmation of the divorce. I immediately went to Chicago and saw my sister. She repeated what she had written to me, told me where Hazel was living, and then took me there to see her. I explained to Hazel that I needed to get confirmation of our divorce, but she said she hadn't divorced me. What? That's crazy. What do you mean? I asked, amazed. You know, it's against my religion. My church doesn't approve of divorces, she said. I was astounded. Here she was living with someone else and with children, but she couldn't approve of divorce. I wrote Ina telling her what had transpired and told her I thought the best thing to do was for her to go back to Moscow. I would get a divorce as quickly as I could and then go back. But I got bogged down in work. There was no money for a divorce and no guarantee that even with the divorce, I would be able to get Ina into the country. I felt very sad about this, and we did exchange letters for a time, but I was unable to get back to the Soviet Union in the 30s, and we eventually lost contact. I later heard from friends who had visited Moscow that she had remarried. Sad. Sad. Absolutely sad. That's the saddest. That was hella sad. I was saying for 300 pages, what happened to Ina? What happened to Ina? And now we found out. The U.S. government broke this man up. The U.S. government did Dr. Umar's job and told Harry, snow bunnies never. They told him snow bunnies never. At the highest level, he met with two ambassadors to bring his wife, who was not a communist. In fact, as we know from Ina's story, her father was killed by the communists. So she was not a part of that, but she loved Harry. And she got left in Riga. She got left. She got her ass left. That should have been reason for him to leave, to go back to the USSR, but I digress. Anyway, we finished up chapters 13 and 14. We're going to pick up on chapters 15, hopefully tomorrow. I got a lot of work tomorrow, but we're going to still get to it. Sharecroppers with guns, organizing the Black Belt. We'll pick up on this. Let me give a shout out to everybody who jumped into the live stream. It's been a hella dope read. We had Arthur Sage up in this, Gordon Fiala, and Brazilian View, showing much love to our people outside. We're going to continue with this reading as soon as I can, and we're going to knock out this very long book pretty soon. Y'all be easy, and peace.